For more than 4 decades, Voyager 2 has glided through the cold, unlit ocean beyond the planets, a small metal ember cast from Earth in 1977 with a mission that seemed straightforward at the time. Visit the outer giants, gather what it could, and then continue outward until its voice thinned into nothing. It was built as a solitary traveler, a mechanical envoy meant to read the winds of Jupiter, skim the rings of Saturn, peer at the pale mystery of Uranus, and finally slip past Neptune in 1989 to begin the long drift into interstellar darkness. Riding on its frame was the Golden Record, a fragile bottle thrown into a cosmic sea, filled with greetings, songs, and the quiet hope that somewhere, someday, another intelligence might find it and understand that we had existed and wondered. After the heliopause, the boundary where the sun's influence fades, Voyager 2 was expected to become a ghost, its power dwindling year by year, its instruments crossing off one by one, until all that remained was a mute relic moving forever through black space. Engineers assumed the most they would ever receive were faint housekeeping pings, occasional scraps of telemetry from an aging craft that had outlived not only its own design life, but also the careers of most who had launched it. Nobody truly expected surprises. Yet in the desolate emptiness beyond the solar frontier, something extraordinary began to happen. The probe whispered back, and not with the thin, tired murmur of a dying machine. A signal arrived at Earth that was strange in shape and behavior, irregular at first glance, yet persistent, cutting through the cosmic static like a deliberate breath. At NASA, the earliest readouts were treated as noise, blamed on a glitch, a tired transceiver, or the subtle mischief of lone particles striking old circuits. But the transmissions continued. They returned again and again, not randomly, not as the familiar stutter of faulty electronics, but in precise bursts that carried an unsettling sense of rhythm. The engineers who had dismissed the first blip felt their skepticism weaken as a second spike came, and then a third, each separated by exactly 11 hours, a spacing too clean to be the shrug of chance. The bursts did not resemble known cosmic events. No solar flare could reach that far. No pulsar matched the cadence. No distant galaxy's roar fit the frequency. The patterns were tight, almost surgical, and embedded within each burst were looping structures in frequency space. Coils of signal braided so densely that they looked like language hiding inside thunder. As analysts tore into the data, they began to see binary-like alternations, a kind of on-off grammar, rising from what should have been meaningless radiation. Voyager 2's onboard systems were never meant to originate something so complex, not after decades of gradual decay, and certainly not without instructions from Earth. What arrived felt less like a malfunction and more like communication that had chosen the probe as its mouthpiece. That possibility changed the room. Suddenly, Voyager 2 was not merely a machine coasting into oblivion. It was a messenger that had, somehow, encountered something in the void, something intelligent enough to reach out, to respond, and to do so in a way it believed Earth would notice. The team pushed deeper, hunting for structure behind the structure, and a breakthrough came when they found that the frequencies did not just repeat, but progressed in a mathematical scaffold. The sequence of intervals aligned eerily with the Fibonacci series, that old universal spiral that appears in shells, storms, and galaxies alike. In nature, the Fibonacci pattern is a fingerprint of growth and order, a language that physics seems to speak without translation. Seeing it carved into a signal from interstellar space felt like discovering a symbol scratched in a stone by an unknown hand. It was no longer plausible to label the bursts as accidental interference. Whatever was shaping them understood mathematics, and by choosing such a recognizable sequence, it seemed to be announcing itself in a dialect any sapient mind might decode. The signal became, in a sense, a spiral not only in numbers but in implication, a tightening coil pulling humanity toward a mystery it had never expected to meet. But the deeper the analysts went, the darker the message felt. This was not a friendly hello drifting in from the stars. It behaved like a beacon or a lure, a calling card from something ancient that had been waiting in the outskirts of our system, aware enough to notice a tiny human artifact and bold enough to answer it. As the decoding continued, another unsettling layer emerged. Voyager 2 itself seemed to be changing. Instruments long powered down to conserve energy began to wake without command, their heaters drawing current, their sensors reorienting. The backup magnetometer, silent for years, flickered to life and aimed itself not toward any pre-programmed target, but toward the coordinates implied by the bursts. This was not random rebooting. The probe's subsystems were correlating to the signal, as if they were listening and responding, focusing attention on a precise region of space outside any planned survey. The effect felt like reprogramming done at a distance, or like an external intelligence had reached into an old machine and flipped switches with purpose. NASA could find no internal fault tree that made sense of it. If Voyager 2 could be nudged into action by something out there, then the encounter was not passive. The probe had entered a relationship. The questions multiplied faster than answers. Had an alien intelligence not just detected Voyager 2, but learned to interact with it, perhaps even to influence its hardware? Or had the probe drifted into a phenomenon that manipulated electromagnetic systems in ways we barely understood? The line between a machine and a participant blurred, and the mission that once looked finished began to feel like the opening chapter of a larger story. When scientists mapped the cadence of the bursts against Voyager 2's trajectory and overlaid them on celestial charts, the results were chilling. The timings and directional cues did not merely trace a route through space. They outlined a kind of corridor through time and danger. The implied path intersected with regions theorized to hold dark matter concentrations, with zones of extreme gravitational shear and with the ancient scars of gamma-ray bursts. Cataclysms powerful enough to sterilize worlds. The signal seemed to point not to places alone, but to events, some deep in cosmic history, and others perhaps poised to repeat. It was as if Voyager 2 had wandered along the footprints of something vast moving through the universe. Or as if the signal were a map leading attention to the universe's most violent thresholds. The idea that a long-dead probe could accidentally chart such a meaningful line felt absurd. So another possibility crept in. Perhaps the route was not accidental at all. Perhaps something had known Voyager 2's course well before launch. Perhaps even steered it, waiting for it to arrive at a predefined intersection. If so, then the golden record was not the only message being carried. Voyager 2 itself had become a key in a lock built by someone else. The dread of that thought hung over every analysis session, because it implied intentions spanning timescales beyond human patience. Then, as if the universe wanted to deepen the riddle, Earth began to echo. Radio observatories worldwide started catching pulses at the exact same frequency as Voyager 2's transmissions, but these were not distant reflections. They were originating from our own planet. At first, technicians blamed local interference, a misbehaving transmitter, a satellite crosstalk. Yet the pulses kept arriving, synchronized to Voyager 2's 11-hour rhythm with unnerving accuracy. Triangulation traced them to multiple sites scattered across the globe and to frequencies emerging from beneath the surface. Old Cold War listening stations sealed up decades ago, buried military observatories, abandoned research complexes that had once hunted for extraterrestrial whispers and then been retired to dust. These facilities should have been inert, power cut, antennas rusted, personnel long gone. But now they were alive again, waking like sleepers who had heard a name called from far away. Electromagnetic waves climbed from underground vaults in perfect resonance with Voyager 2's strange bursts, as though some hidden network had been waiting for a trigger only the probe could provide. The coincidence was too layered to explain away. The most disturbing speculation was also the most natural. Whatever had contacted Voyager 2 was not isolated in the void. It might have a presence on Earth, a dormant infrastructure embedded in human history, perhaps in secrecy, perhaps in plain sight, lying quiet until the right signal arrived. The synchronized stations behaved less like random relics short-circuiting and more like nodes in a system receiving a wake-up call, a cosmic handshake that reactivated protocols older than anyone currently alive. To the scientists watching the data dance, it felt as if Earth itself had become part of the conversation, but without knowing it had ever been invited. As the community reeled from that possibility, NASA engineers revisited Voyager 2's telemetry with harsher eyes and uncovered another anomaly threading through the logs: phantom commands. These were not the ordinary packets sent from Earth, not the probe's own error correction chatter, but instructions appearing at irregular intervals in a signature that matched no current system. When decrypted, they resembled legacy NASA command structures, protocols decommissioned long ago, some never publicly released, yet with flourishes that made them more advanced than Voyager 2 should have been able to interpret. The commands were guiding the probe's behavior, altering its data collection priorities, nudging it toward regions it was never meant to study, like a puppeteer tugging on old strings. The engineers tried to imagine benign explanations. Could this be corruption mimicking patterns by chance? Could cosmic rays have rewritten a buffer into something that coincidentally looked like protocol? But the guidance was too coherent, too relentlessly purposeful. If the commands did not originate from Earth, then some other intelligence was speaking in a language shaped to resemble ours, either because it had learned our systems or because it had helped design them in the first place. That thought turned the mystery from strange to terrifying. It suggested not only contact, but comprehension, as if something out there had studied human technology and found ways to slide into it. Even worse, the commands appeared to steer Voyager 2 toward the same ominous phenomena flagged in the burst map: dark matter knots, gravitational distortions, the echoes of gamma violence. The probe was not just being contacted, it was being used. The notion took root that Voyager 2 might be a tool in someone else's experiment, an unwilling surveyor carrying our eyes into corners of the cosmos we would have avoided. And if a mind could reach into the probe and direct it, what else could it reach? The dread sharpened again when simulations based on Voyager 2's navigation and time-stamped bursts hinted at a deeper violation of normal physics. The probe had traversed a region where frame dragging, the twisting of space-time by massive rotating bodies, should have caused only subtle distortions, yet the data suggested something far more extreme. When timing models were run, the arrival of certain packets seemed to precede their transmission. In plain terms, the signal hit Earth before Voyager 2 sent it. At first, this was treated as a bookkeeping error, a clock drift, a calibration mismatch between deep space network antennas. But the effect persisted across independent reconstructions. It looked as if Voyager 2 had skimmed a zone where causality frayed, where time bent enough to let information leak backward along the line of travel. If that were true, then some of what NASA was decoding might not be messages from deep space at all, but messages from the future. The phantom commands could be instructions not from aliens, but from a later, unknown branch of humanity, or from a timeline where our own technology had matured into something capable of reaching back through warped space-time. The possibility was intoxicating and horrifying in equal measure, because it meant Voyager 2 had become a hinge between eras, not merely a traveler between stars. Linear time, the comforting arrow of past to present to future, suddenly looked like a local habit rather than a law. Within that warped theater, who could say what was sending what or why? As if to punctuate the nightmare with a final visual, Voyager 2 then returned imagery that defied easy classification. In the black ahead of it floated an object first mistaken for a rogue asteroid, yet it did not tumble or spin. It hung in space perfectly still, a dark mass the size of Earth's moon, its surface smooth, featureless, and so black it swallowed light rather than reflecting it. Under higher analysis, the silhouette showed fractal symmetry, a repeating geometry suggestive of engineering rather than geology. Stranger still, the object seemed to shift in response to Voyager 2's transmissions, subtly altering its position as if tracking the probe, as if aware of being watched. It did not behave like debris. It behaved like a sentinel or a construct waiting for a signal it recognized. The room at NASA went quiet when that conclusion settled. If a moon-sized engineered body was drifting in interstellar space, responsive to a tiny human probe, then we were no longer talking about a single odd signal, but about a scale of intelligence and intent that dwarfed our own.